Twilight walked carefully through the fog, taking note of the unusual surroundings. There was no longer snow on the ground. Everywhere she could see was conspicuously missing distinct feel of winter. In fact, the very air itself seemed to have warm as well. The wind no longer contained the biting winter chill. In its place was a warm wind that pushed the fog slowly across town, though it's never cleared the unusual weather. All right, the first thing we should do is find Pinkie Pie. If we find her, we'll be able to find the princess in no time. Spike smiled, looking over at the map. And if we keep heading down this road, we'll make it to Sugar Cube Corner. And before we know it, we'll see her. Spike said with a grin, creating a separate atmosphere from the fog around them. Thanks, Spike. Even the faces of crisis, you're still my number one assistant, Twilight said, smiled and grateful to have him with her at the moment. Hearing his voice right now was comforting. She had hesitated about taking him with her, thinking that it would be safer to leave him in the library, where he would lock himself away from any danger. At least had that vision. Whatever was going on in the town, she knew Spike wasn't safe back at the library. She wondered if there was any place in town at the moment that would guarantee his safety. Twilight's eyes scanned around the building that they were walking past as she came to a slow stop for one. Huh? What's the matter, Twilight? Spike asked, wondering why the pony had stopped suddenly. Spike, every single house we're passing seems to be boarded up just like how the library was. Twilight explained, taking a short detour from their route and walking up to the front door. The entrance to the building was closed, but all around she could see the wooden planks had boarded up the windows, blocking light from entering the building. She reached her hoof up and tried to push on the door, and she heard it jam. She fumbled with it for a bit, hearing the constant jarring of the door as if the locks were broken. Why do you think that is? Spike asked, watching Twilight fumbling with the door. I couldn't say. She paused shortly and to contemplate on the strange door. This phenomenon seems to have affected the whole town, which means every pony is likely trapped inside of their homes like we were. Twilight put a hoof up to her chin in contemplation, which may have meant we won't be able to get Pinkie's help in finding Celestia. Well, you never know until you try, right? Spike said, thinking to himself. Besides, if I know Pinkie Pie, I'm sure she's already figured out the puzzle and getting the store ready for some bad weather pony parties. Always the optimist, Spike, Twilight chuckled, turning from the house and walking back down towards the road to Sugar Cube Corner. Hey, someone has to be, Spike grinned, suddenly before shifting on Twilight's back and pointing ahead. Twilight, look! Someone got out of their house. Twilight quickly looked in that direction, seeing a pony-shaped figure in the fog. Hey, you're right, Spike, hey! Twilight called out, quickly racing towards it. Did you escape from your house too? The figure in the fog seemed to have turned its attention to Twilight, noticing her approaching. Drawing closer to one of them, could discern that the figure was wearing an all-black cloak around its body, its face hidden beneath the hood of its cloak. Sakura? Is that you? Twilight asked, finally slowing down as she approached, and grateful to her friend. Oh, Sakura, thank goodness you're here. Something's happened to Ponyville and I don't know what. You know more about this strange stuff like this. Do you know what's happening? The cloaked figure just stood there, continuing to stare at Twilight. Twilight suddenly felt a little uneasy at the staring, having expected to hear the familiar voice of the rhyming zebra. Hello? Twilight tried to communicate. Any pony in there? You have a kind look in your eyes that seem surprised. A deep feminine voice escaped from the cloak, the voice seeming to send chills down Twilight's spine as she took a step back out of instinct. I fear your soon life will be compromised. My life? Twilight stammered, thrown off of her balance mentally at the sudden sharpness of the voice before her. Hey, you're not Sakura. Who are you? She asked, trying to steady herself. She felt vibrations starting to come from her back. Twilight quickly realizing that Spike was shaking. Time shall weave and pass through you, and you shall be lost with the whims of the night. Shadows prowl and seek at your flesh, which will tear you apart with loud delight. The cloaked mare began walking slowly back towards the fog. Hey, get back here! You haven't answered any of my questions! Twilight yelled, trying to run back to the cloaked figure. With a powerful wind of gusts that the figure was covered by the fog, before seeming to disappear into thin air. Twilight stared at the dumbfounded when the mare had been, looking around for her. There had been no sound of any pony running away, no flash of magic indicating they'd be teleported. It was as if they hadn't acted as they existed in the first place. Is she gone? Spike asked, managing to stop shaking long enough to look over the top of Twilight's head at where the mare had once stood. Yeah, she is, Spike, but I have no idea where she went. Twilight was baffled at this. This wasn't an illusion. Both of them had heard the mare talk. Something about her had scared Spike, and she felt as if herself felt a sense of unease and dread hearing the mare's voice. We should keep moving. Sugar Cube Corner isn't much further, Twilight said to Spike, gulping down the anxiety building up in her throat. Right, we should just need to continue forward, Spike said hesitantly, looking into the fog for the bakery. Suddenly the strange fog seemed to be a lot more menacing than it had been moments ago. Right, Twilight nodded her head slowly before continuing with her walking. Her hoof steps seemingly unusually loud now, each step seeming to echo against the cobblestone street. She hadn't been paying much attention before, but the echoing steps had told her that the town was apparently empty. Twilight, do you hear that? Spike said, panicking in his voice. Twilight stopped walking until she heard a distant sound of metal scraping against the cobblestone. She perked her ear to her own the sound, hearing it several times in short succession. Clank, 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 clank. The rhythm of the metal scraping was tuned to some pony walking, but there was more to it than that. She narrowed her eyes in the direction before her, the direction of the sound was coming from. She tried to focus on what was making that sound, beginning to see another faint figure in the fog, slowly heading out towards them. It was then another metal sound was heard. It was the sound of metal being dragged along the ground. Who's there? Twilight called out to the figure. The figure began to grow more and more definition as it slowly grew closer to her. It didn't respond. Twilight, there's more, Spike said, quickly turning to the unicorn's head to look for anywhere else in the fog. Twilight's eyes widened, catching the sight of more figures beginning to appear in the haze of the fog. Each figure brought that with the metal scraping of their hoof steps, as well as being dragging something metal along the ground. Unnerved Twilight, she could feel the stairs standing up on the back of her neck. There was something very wrong with what was happening around her. She slowly began to walk backwards, away from the creature as they approached. Hey, stop freaking us out! Just tell us who you are! Twilight cried out, trying to get answers. But all of her questioning was in vain. The figures just keep continuing to approach. She swept her gaze back and forth rapidly, between the approaching enigmas on the fog, trying to determine what they were cornering her and Spike. She counted at least 5 now, and half the circle around them. They were going to try and stop them from continuing forward, as if they didn't want her to go to Sugar Cube Corner. Twilight turned her attention to the first one she had spotted. For a moment she froze in horror, staring at the creature that had appeared from the fog, though it looked to be in the shape of a pony. There was no way Twilight could have discerned it being one. The creature was wearing armor, although it was different from the royal guards she had seen in Canterlot. The armor was thicker and covered in much more of its body, reaching under their bellies and down their flanks. The armor was rusted away with age, covered in battle scars of what appeared to be must be in many battles. The shape and the design of the armor was unlike anything Twilight had seen before. The armor seemed a little bit more like ancient design. But it wasn't the armor that sent fear into the spine. It was a simple look at her face of the creature. It had no eyes. Its skin was barely holding its face, rotted and diseased, as if the creature had an identity was long ago. The rest of the skin was exposed through the armor, shared with the same fate. Twilight couldn't even comprehend how the creature was standing, let alone walking towards her. In its mouth was dragging heftily double-edged sword along the ground. It seemed to have difficulty in holding it, yet it was unhindered with its advance. "Zombie pony!" Spike yelled, suddenly scared out of his mind. "Spike, calm down. There's no such thing as zombie ponies," Twilight cried back at the terrified dragon, doing everything she could to keep herself calm too, even though she was berating him now. He had snapped her back into reality. She turned her head back to the deformed creature and forced a smile on her face, despite the sweat beginning to fall down her face. "Excuse me, you must be to seem hurt. Please let me help." The air was punctuated with a loud metallic clang that reverberated through the air. Twilight stood like a ghost was staring before her, where a blade of the creature's sword had embedded into the ground, just mere inches away from her. She had narrowly just escaped, no longer having a head. Twilight just stood there, paralyzed at the sudden situation, as the soldier-like creature slowly pulled the blade out from the ground, adjusting it to its mouth for a better grip. He began to lift her up for another strike at the terrified unicorn. "Twilight! Twilight, run!" Spike shouted straight in her ear. The petrified pony felt her heart skip a beat, and life returned to her veins, her mind finally getting the message to her legs. Her body jumped back, instinctively, moving out of its way out of danger, as the sword came striking down once more, cleaving through the cobblestone with ease. Twilight turned onto her hooves to run, noticing the approach of the other creatures. 5 of those things were walking towards her, some dragging swords, some dragging spears. One of them was dragging an axe. Adrenaline coursed through her body, and her hooves began to pound the ground with force, carrying her body forward with barely any idea of where she was headed. She just ran from these abominations of nature, knowing they intended to kill her and her number one assistant. She'd never forgive herself if harm came to the baby dragon. The sound of scraping metal suddenly increased. She dared a glance behind her, seeing the armored creatures chase in after her. They had slowly shambled towards her, but now they were in full pursuit behind her. Her mind was in full panic, turning to look in front of her once more. She was running straight for a house. One she recognized was the house for sale near Sugar Cube Corner. The sides were boarded up just like the rest of the town. Twilight instantly realizing it must be a dead end. She looked to her sides. The creatures were preparing their weapons to strike her down, as if she drew close as they chased at her. If she didn't head straight for the house, she wouldn't be a whole unicorn for very long. She gulped down panic that she had lodged in her throat, put her efforts in every last-ditch effort. She had to get through the door no matter what. Her horn lit up, surrounding the door with magic. She instantly tried the lock off of it by chance it would open. Before thinking, she'd ram into it to break it though, and the door opened, by some miracle, as if knowing she was in peril. The door gave way to her magic by Celestia. She countered her thanks and slipped right through the door, slamming it closed behind her. Without a moment of rest, she wiped her head around and looking for something to barricade the door with. Her eyes fell upon the couch inside the dark, musty room. She instantly surrounded with her magic and slammed the furniture against the door, firmly holding it in place. Seconds passed and Twilight braced the couch against the door, slowly backing away from it. She could feel sweat pouring down her face like bullets, nervous and anxiety building up as she didn't know what was going to happen. The brief time she felt like antagonizing minutes, not knowing what was going to happen next. Wood splintered and broke, the scrapball flying across the room as Twilight shrieked, a sword slashing through the thick wooden walls. The sword got caught in the fixtures of the wall for a brief moment before sliding back out. Twilight cried out in terror, gripping hard against Twilight's neck, practically choking her. Twilight couldn't even speak up to protest, only stared in horror. The next weapon broke through the wood of foundations. It was the head of the spear. A sword lashed through next, followed by an axe right next to it. Her heart beating in her throat as her panic swallowed breaths echoed in her ears, struggling to get air in her lungs. The weapons all wailed out on the wall, creating several holes and lacerations into the walls and door. They were desperately trying to break their way in. Twilight didn't even know if they would be able to break through, but she was terrified that they would. The axe bore its way through the door once more, pausing as it sat stuck in the doorframe. Twilight stared at it, waiting for a moment. A continued destruction of weapons. The axe slowly withdrew from the door, and for a brief moment, Twilight could hear the scraping metal footsteps growing quiet. The creatures were leaving them alone for whatever reason. They'd stopped their assault. Are they gone? Spike asked, not daring to look at the door to the creatures who had so anxiously been striking at. It was then the word finally got to their brain that Spike was strangling her. Spike, can't breathe. The words barely escaped from her lips. Oh, Twilight, I'm so sorry. Spike apologized and instantly let go of her neck, letting Twilight inhale much air she needed for breath. She then gasped for a moment, letting the musty air fill her lungs, before coughing it back out, crashing down into a lying position on her belly. I've been better, Spike. Twilight finally managed to muster, starting to feel the rush wear off. With her body calming down, her mind could finally start to process what exactly it was that just happened to them. Twilight, what were those things? They look like zombies. Zombies wielding swords and spears and axes. Spike grabbed his head, and the baby dragon started to freak out. They tried to attack us. We almost lost our heads. I thought the zombie ponies weren't supposed to be real. Spike was now in a full panic mode. Spike, Twilight gasped for air, standing up slowly, looking around the shambling, frantic dragon. Spike, calm down. She finally spoke calmly, the baby dragon looking up at her. His mind was still racing. Calm down? Calm down? Did you see what almost happened to us? He cried desperately, waving his hands that splintered all around the wall and door. I did, Spike, but panicking about our situation isn't going to help it. Twilight said, taking a deep breath. We know we're in a bad situation, but if you panic, you're only going to make the bad situation worse. Are you lecturing me? Spike asked, almost shocked. Now of all times? Twilight blinked a bit confused, before smiling softly at the baby dragon, amused by his statement. It was true. She was giving him a bit of her usual lecture, but seeing the young dragon she cared for so much being frantic seemed to spark some sort of instinct inside of her that told her that she needed to keep him calm. The same instinct that he had told her to bring him with her, was now telling her she needed to make sure that he was just going to be all right, and that his well-being was more important than her own. That old feeling told her that she couldn't just let what transpired to get her off for Spike's sake. Maybe a little, but listen, if we panic, we're going to make the bad decisions, and if we make bad decisions, we're going to run into those things again. Zombies, Spike interrupted. Spike, do you really believe that we were chased down by zombies? Twilight asked, unsure of the answer. Well, they looked like zombies. They sounded like zombies, and it attacked us like zombies. I am going to go with zombies. Spike listed the reasons off his finger. Fine, so zombies are apparently real? Twilight did not find any comfort in that statement. The better question is what they were actually doing in Ponyville, and why. She looked over the splintered wall once more. There has to be some reason, some explanation that will tell us what's going on here. This is bad, Twilight. What if they're turning the whole town into a zombie horde as we speak? Spike shivered at the thought of being attacked by a massive army of creatures. I don't think that's likely, Spike. Twilight put a hoof to her chin. She thought about how the creatures looked. Though you are right that their skin and the manner of moving is similar to the stories about zombies, and how they were still different from those stories, For one thing, they were all wearing armor, and if they were ponies from this town, why would they be wearing such regal-looking armor? Twilight then began to pace as she fought. Second of all, they all attacked us with weapons. The zombies from any other story we've heard about the attack is by biting and spread infection that way. If they were trying to amass an army, they would want us all infected in one place. Well, maybe they were really confused zombies. You know, they lose control in their thoughts when they turn, Spike said, trying to give his favor into his argument. Let's focus, Spike. Twilight shook her head. The biggest problem there is of those zombies are roaming around town. They're likely attacking innocent ponies. We have to find Celestia and put a stop to this. How are we going to do that? We can't go out the front door with those things probably waiting for us. Spike motioned once more to the broken front door. Twilight had to admit, she was unwilling to go out that door now. I guess we'll have to find another way out. Twilight looked around the room, getting a good look at it now. She wasn't distracted by the fear of her own life or Spike's rambling about the zombie ponies. They were in the house's living room. The couch that had been in the middle of it was now pressed up against a splintered door in the center of the room that had been a broken table, split down the middle and lying in the pieces. They were lying several doorways scattered around in the living room, one leading to the kitchen. One looked like a closet, and one to what looked like seemed to be the basement that was boarded up into what led to the bathroom. And that was also boarded up. There was even the stairs to the upper room, from a balcony that can be seen from the first door, that showed doors on the second floor. Alright, I have no idea whose house we're in right now. It doesn't look like anyone's house lived in here in quite some time. Twilight turned to the door opening towards the kitchen and walked towards it. As if she entered, she finally began to notice how dark it was inside the house. She could barely see anything within the kitchen. Her instinct was starting to casting through the light spell when a thought occurred to her. If she was using that light spell and had to switch to a different spell, the light could cut out and she'd be stuck in the dark. If there was a monster in there hiding and wanting to attack her, she wouldn't be able to see where she was needed to defend herself. This was a problem. Twilight then took a moment to think about it, knowing full well that she needed a light. As soon as she lifted a hoof up to her chin to think, a material of her pendant brushed against it. Surprised, she looked down to remind herself that she was still wearing the same pendant from Canterlot Archives. Oh, of course. She smiled to herself, being reminded of it. She pressed her hoof against it, and the crystal came to life, illuminating the world before her. The part of the pendant that was used to read books was now serving her as a lantern. Now she was able to see, and quickly she gave the kitchen a glance over. The kitchen hadn't fared that much from the living room. Many of the counters were broken mess, worn away with age and rotting. Many of the doors and cupboards were loosely dangling the hinges, but that was left over with rust and age. Cracks covered the floor, and they were brown with red stains littered throughout the kitchen. However, Twilight's eyes fell upon it as what she found what she was looking for. A back door that was neatly placed at the end of the kitchen. It must have been a patio door. If they could get to the backyard, they could get around those creatures down from the front. Twilight's hoof reached to the door, and she tried the doorknob, hearing the distant sound of it being locked. Of course it is, Twilight sighed, looking down at the handle, seeing a keyhole similar to the one that she had been seeing inside of her house. She realized that it must have been the similar situation from her own home. Somewhere within the house was a key to this door, probably within some dumb box within some dumb puzzle that she needed to figure out. Twilight quickly returned to the living room, illuminating Spike with her pendant, causing him to be blinded momentarily. Ah! Wait, watch where you're pointing that thing, Spike said, covering his eyes. Oh, sorry, Spike, Twilight chuckled softly, before walking up to him and keeping the light directly out of his eyes. There's a door to the kitchen that looks like a way out. However, it's locked by a similar lock that was on our front door. I'm gonna go upstairs and see if I can find the key. Alright, well, then I'll search for downstairs for anything, Spike said, ready to help. Actually, Spike, I was just hoping you'd stay down here and not go exploring. I don't know what could be waiting for us in this house, or if those things are going to attack again. If you stay here, I can hear you shout for me, and I'll come to you quickly," Twilight explained as the best as she can to her assistant. But, Spike began to protest. "No buts, Spike. I can take care of myself, but I have to be able to take care of you too. It's safe here for the moment, so please wait for me and to look upstairs. I won't be longer than a minute or two, and if you need me, I'm a single shout away, okay?" Twilight pleaded to the baby dragon, hoping he'd understand. Spike hesitated for a moment, fiddling with his fingers, unsure of what he could do. "All right, Twilight, but if you need me, call me right away, okay?" Spike said, giving her a look of determination in return. "Thank you, Spike," Twilight said, quickly nuzzling against him. Yeah, just go find the key and be safe, all right?" Normally Spike would protest again of how show of affection, but considering the circumstances, it seemed appropriate. "I will, Spike. I'm not about to leave you alone," Twilight said, giving him one last reassuring smile before turning and proceeding up to the second floor. Each step on the stairwell gave a loud groaning creak with each of her hoof step. She worried at the age of the structure with one wrong step she would find her legs stuck in a broken splintered wood. However, the stairwell seemed to hold up, and as soon as she was on the balcony on the second floor, she looked back in the living room and on the second floor, seeing Spike look up at her. Anywhere from the balcony, she had a good view on the first floor, so she could easily jump to Spike's aid at any time. However, she then turned her head to look at the doors, and on the second floor she could see 6 in total, though 2 of the doors were boarded up with wooden panels. Twilight had returned to the closest unbarred door. It was the only door just left to the stairwell. Twilight pushed the door open, creaking as its hinges moved. Twilight swept slowly across the room, checking to see if there was anything amiss. The room looked to be some old library or perhaps a study room. There were bookshelves that were now deprived of books, gathering dusts and cobwebs with time. A few blank papers were scattered on the floor near an old rotting desk, and on the other side of the room, she spotted something unusual. Sitting on top of the chair was a safe, and it looked pretty much too heavy for the chair to be holding. Yet somehow it did. On the front of the safe was a piece of paper that quickly appeared to be some messy writing on it. Twilight quickly walked over to the safe, examined it carefully. Just seemed to be a normal cast iron dial safe that was unlocked with the combination number. Her horn lit up with magic as she grabbed a hold of a piece of paper from the safe and lifted up to her face to read it. "A part of the key is locked away here. I locked it away so that it won't hurt us again. If you want the key, you must answer these riddles. Free for the combined answers will unlock the key. If you find nothing, then you're not there yet. But if you find more than me, you have gone too far." At sunrise, the foals come out to play. They play all day as the sun began to set and the moon rose above their heads. They continued to play despite the night, never tiring or growing weary. They did not stop until they saw the sunrise once more, and they went tired back to their homes. In my collection, I will have but 4 ponies, though sadly 2 befell from an accident and lost a leg each. It's unfortunate to say, but the legs will suffice just to make a small change. Twilight then thought of the odd note for a minute. After all, it seemed like a random set of riddles just set up for her to answer. She looked at the safe and then back at the note and pondered what the words meant in her head. I suppose the answer is the combination to the safe, which means the answer to all these riddles must be the numbers. Twilight looked back at the riddles and read them again, carefully looking for the answer to this puzzle. She racked her brain for a few minutes, going over the possible solutions in her head. However, she finally came to the set of numbers that made sense to her. Alright, 1, 24, 14. She spoke aloud as she turned the dial back and forth as the dial landed on the final number, letting out a satisfying click, informing her that she had solved the puzzle. She opened the safe door and peered inside, hoping to find the key to door downstairs. There were 2 things inside the safe, none of which were a key. She sighed a little disappointed, though, somehow not surprised before inspecting the items there. The first thing her eyes came across was this iron helmet. It seemed strange for her that the item would randomly be in the safe. She picked it up with her magic and inspected it. It looked almost as if it was brand new. It shined through in the light of her pendant. She pondered a bit, just leaving it there, but something in her gut told her that it might be useful. She wasn't sure what exactly a random iron helmet would be useful for, but at the same time, she remembered that those 2 items she obtained after solving the puzzles in her own home. Iron helmets soon vanished, being stored safely with her magic. The other item in the safe was a strange ancient coin with weird markings on it. She levitated closer, inspecting it, and at the first she couldn't tell what it was, but she looked over at the memories of her books, and she read it back, and Canterlot came to her mind. The strange design of the coin were an ancient equestrian, and the circle had a metallic extension on the back for embedding on clothing or armor, and as her magic surrounded it, she could feel a soft pulse emanating from it. This was an ancient medallion. There used to be imbued magic properties, and without them, Twilight was fascinated from having discovered this in the safe. Judging by the age, it must be at least 1,000 years old. Despite the age, it still holds that magical charge. Equestrian magic is truly amazing. She smiled in wonder at the device. Twilight dropped the medallion as she nearly jumped out of her skin. An instinct made her jump away from the medallion as it began to make distorted, garbling sounds. She stared at it in shock, not sure of what to make of the noises. She thought she could hear a voice playing through the strange messages. Bizarre-ish, Hellshro lone her run away, Krish. Twilight could do nothing more but stare in horror at the medallion until it finally grew quiet. She had no idea what had just happened with it. She never known medallions store voice or sounds before. Sure, it wasn't the basis for some musical equipment that was developed recently, but it was technology beyond what ponies should have had 1,000 years ago. She slowly approached the medallion and tapped it with her hoof. It didn't seem to be doing anything now. She wondered if the sound had been triggered because she had poured magic onto the device, and if there was many items that required regular recharge with unicorn magic. Twilight levitated the medallion once more and gently poured some into her magic into the device, expecting it to hear the sound of it start up once more. She was baffled by the silence as it produced. She whirled the medallion around, inspecting it from every angle she could, but nothing came. It almost as if the whole thing had been just her imagination. From her brow she furrowed in frustration at the piece of metal in front of her. She resigned herself into putting it away into her magic repository and forgetting about it for a moment. She made space in the bag as a revisor for it, and attempted to place it back inside. However, the coin refused to budge. Though she could fit it, for some reason, it refused to go into holding her space. Hey, what gives? Twilight glared at the coin, trying to get it several times to vanish from her sight and find a place inside of her magic, but it simply refused. She let out a huff in frustration at the medallion. Maybe it's enchanted to not work with this kind of spell, which is stupid. Why would it be enchanted against being carried inside by a magic vessel? She groaned before thinking what to do about it. She examined the metal extension on the back, noticing that it was thin and strong, able to clamp down hard either cloth or metal, depending on what it was going to enchant. She looked down at the string of her pendant. The medallion's metal extension slipped on and now on the string and snapped closed, now firmly attached to her pendant. There, now I'll be able to keep hold of it. She wasn't sure how long she was going to need it for the note said that these items that led her into key into unlocking the back door, so she needed to take them with her. With nothing else notably interesting in the room, Twilight turned and exited out of the room. She looked over at the railing, down to see that Spike had found a circle with the candle lit with his fire. He was staring at some pictures that were hanging on the walls in the living room. You okay, Spike? Twilight called down to him, causing the baby dragon to look up. Yeah, I'm fine. I was just looking at some stuff down here, he replied. Alright, just be careful. I just don't want you getting hurt. She was still worried about what would happen to him if she was gone for too long. I know. Don't worry much. I'll be fine down here. Spike nodded his head before holding back at the pictures. Twilight smiled softly at the young dragon. It wasn't very often that he knew that to take a situation like that seriously. But if it seemed like he was able to do it this time, she was grateful for that calm rationality that was going to keep them from getting hurt.